Good evening, everyone. I'm Joseph. Our capstone project is entitled Make-SENs, Campaigning for a Data-Driven Election. Together with me are Rods, Hurley, and Razzle. Youth's voting power will shape the election for years to come, starting 2022. According to Comelec, there is an estimated 62 to 63 million voters in 2022. There are 4 million potential registrants who turned 18 this year that could register to vote. Last 2019 midterm elections, as high as 31% of the voters are from the ages 18 to 29, the Gen Zs and the Millennials. According to the 2019 Functional Literacy, Education and Mass Media Survey by the Philippine Statistics Authority, the youth has the highest functional literacy rate at the average of 95.5% compared to the 2013 study of an average functional literacy rate of 94.4% of that age group. The future looks bright for our youth. If we look back, however, at how we vote, Philippines is still dominated by personality-based politics instead of issue-oriented governments. This gives us a question. How do we change this personality-based voting to goal-based voting? To try and aid this transition, next slide, we need the most influential tool we have in our modern age, and that is none other than the social media platforms. The use of social media platforms is practically free and has the potential to reach a significant amount of potential voters and supporters. But how are the candidates are using these platforms? We use natural language processing techniques to uncover what are the candidates are saying, what are the sentiments that can be derived from their posts or tweets, what are their political stance, and what needs to be done. Next is Hurley to discuss the data science method.
Thank you, Joseph. So for our data science method, first, we start by understanding our problem of converting personality-based voting to a goal-based voting. We then proceed to understand our data, specifically candidate tweets, audience tweet, news articles, and candidate Wikipedia pages. After which, we prepare our data by removing hashtag mentions, punctuations, and the like. After preparing our data, we can now do analysis with it using natural language processing. Specifically, we're going to be using latent Dirichlet allocation and zero-shot learning to get relevant topics from our text data and to relate the audiences with their candidates. After doing such, we can then proceed to our model evaluation, which we can then repeat until our model is good enough for deployment. For our first question, who is saying what? This is going to be answered by Joseph.
Okay, to answer our first question, we analyzed the tweets of the 2019 senatorial candidates during the campaign period from February 12 to May 11. So using the latent Dirichlet allocation mallet for our topic modeling, we have arrived with 8 topics with a coherence score of 0.36. Emerged as the top topic is about drugs, agrarian reform, which with the highest engagement in terms of replies, retweets, and likes. Looking at the top 12 candidates, their most engaged topics or tweets is about peace and order, followed by tweets about their on-ground campaign rallies and education and the youth. This is different, however, with the top 13 to 24. The top most engaged tweets is about drugs and agrarian reform, followed by China, people's right, and finally equality and empowerment. To answer the second question for the sentiment analysis, here's Hurley again.
Thank you. So we did sentiment analysis on both audiences and candidate tweets to see how candidates present themselves and how such is perceived by their audiences. We grouped each candidate by their coalition, Hugpong ng Pagbabago, Otso Diretso, and the remaining coalitions were regarded as others. After getting the results, we have found that most candidate tweets tend to be more positive, but most notably, those that are in the coalition of Hugpong ng Pagbabago tend to show more positive tweets compared to their other coalitions. Also, if we check the objectivity score, we can see that almost all virtues are also subjective. For the audience tweet, we can see that the mean polarity score has lowered, but by observing it or the results, we can still see that it's still leaning towards the positive side. The objectivity or subjectivity score rather still shows us that their tweets tend to be more on the objective side too. For our third question, what are their political stances? This is going to be answered by Raza.
Thank you, Hurley. For the political stance of the candidates, we scrape data from online news outlets to check their stance on controversial platforms. We classified these characteristics into two categories. First one is traditional and the other one is progressive. These two categories describe the stance of the candidates based on Filipino politics and cultural norms. As you can see in the graph, the x-axis represents traditional views and the y-axis represents progressive views. The size of the plotted bubbles represent the number of votes for each candidate and the colors represent the election results. The dashed line on the graph represents the neutrality of the candidates from the two categories. Based from our findings, most of the winning candidates are traditional. So our group has already answered 3 questions that describe the online post of candidates and the audience during the election season. To further help our audience to discern and predict who to vote for the upcoming elections, we created a program that would analyze how similar are the audience Facebook and Twitter posts and the SDG characteristics of the candidates' Wikipedia profiles. To further explain to us our program, I'll give the floor to Rods.
Thank you, Russell. So let me introduce our machine learning model, which we named Make-SENs. It was trained on a dataset that our team have scraped from Facebook, Twitter, and Wikipedia. Currently, the dataset is about 297,000 records of tweets, posts, comments, and content articles. Also with about 671,000 hashtags and about a total of 17 million words. Our model utilized ZSL transformer, which is based on BERT. We made some NLP model tuning so that the model would fit our purpose by this project. The topic labels that we used in training our model were inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, of the United Nations. And the result of training the different classification models is shown on the table that you may see on the right part of your screen. Now, to make sense of how our model works, let's first have a basic example. So we have here the text profiles from 2 presidential votes of 2016 election. Next to it is the set of text from Facebook posts of 2 supporters of each presidential vote. So from that, Make-SENs model will process about 14,000 words to compute for SDG scores. And after having the SDG scores computed, the model can also compute for the similarity score between the voters group and the candidates group. The similarity score would mean the likelihood by which each netizen or voter group will vote for based on the similarity of their SDG scores with the candidates. We can derive from the result that Thinking Pinoy group will most likely vote for presidential Bold Duterte. On the other hand, Rojas Robredo group will most likely vote for presidential Bol Rojas. Next is, let's make sense of what a bigger, or somewhat a bigger picture. By that, we mean, let's test our Make-SENs model on a bigger data set. In this example, the model utilized a data set of about 5.5 million words. And given those data, our model predicted that the senatorial Angara has the closest SDG similarity score with the voters. In fact, he ranked 6th place in the senatorial race that year. So how does the netizens SDG score similar to the candidates SDG score? So let's check what topics the netizen is saying about in their social media. Our 2019 election data set consists of 336,000 comments and around 15,000 hashtags. So let's also check what is the SDG score of each senatorial senatorial's online profile. Here you go. Yeah, and finally, let's have a quick tour and make predictions about the coming 2022 election. For this example, our current data set is about 365,000 words, about 15,000 comments, and about 3,000 hashtags that talks about the coming election. Also, the netizens' current SDG score is also shown in the graph. That's all for the demo. Back to you, Razel.
Thank you, Rods. For conclusion of our project, we summarize our results to three main points. First, the topics of the winning candidates and the losing candidates' tweets are totally different. Second one, the candidates and the audience tweets are tend to be positive and objective. Lastly, based on controversial platforms, the winning candidates are traditional while the losing candidates are progressive. For our call for action, we ask the candidates to know their audience more and to have a voice on important social issues or platforms to help the audience to discern more on who to vote. For the voters, we never stop to remind you to vote wisely and not to spread fake news as it contributes heavily on the public view on the candidates. For our recommendations, we ask data we recommend data scientists to explore more modern NLP techniques and classification analyses, as well as to explore more data sets regarding election fraud and historical data to help our social scientists, researchers, and lawmakers contribute greater knowledge about the matter. Lastly, we recommend them to create data sets on interviews so that we improve candidate profiling for the benefit of the voters. Thank you for listening in our presentation. I hope that you have learned a lot in our project.